Hello, everyone. Welcome to From Her Perspective. I'm your host, First Lieutenant Nakia Comer, and I am here today with First Lieutenant Lauren McGovern, a really good friend of mine. Hey, Lauren, if you don't mind, please tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yes, and thank you for having me on. My commissioning source is West Point, graduated in 2018, played soccer there with Nakia, and my current job is at Fort Riley. I work up in division headquarters with Victory Wellness, which is a mental health awareness and holistic wellness program that One ID has created. My branch is armor, so I have no specialty in mental health, but I focus on resource education for soldiers. And I hope to stay at Fort Riley for the next year or so doing just that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, for our topic today, we will be discussing the perception of females in combat arms. So I can't really speak much from that perspective on a combat arm. I am a logistics officer, so it is still rare that we have a lot of women in our unit. But for Lauren, it is way more rare to have women because it's a combat arm. So it is mostly male dominated. So that is why I wanted Lauren on the show today to kind of speak on some of her experiences as a female and how she has been perceived in her unit. And so, Lauren, if you don't mind, may you please tell us what you were thinking kind of when you first got to your unit and when you were given, your job to take over as a platoon leader. What was kind of going through your mind? How important was that first impression for you?
Yeah, so I just want to preface this by saying that, I'm not a perfect leader, and I'm not trying to say that I have all the answers. I don't want to act like I didn't make mistakes and didn't have stuff that I probably should have done differently, but I just want to give my perspective from my experience. So with saying that, as far as first impressions, I mean, they're crucial. I think they're crucial for any leader, because it kind of sets up, the success that you might have later. And for women, I think, it's slightly different than men, women in combat arms specifically, because you're kind of working from a disadvantage inherently. Not everybody that is in that unit is going to think differently about you, but there's going to be quite a few. And then even if they're well intentioned, even if they don't have any issues with women, but they have never had a female leader, like they're going to be a bit hesitant, right? Because they've never experienced a female leader before. So I would say that first impressions not that you can't come back from them if it's bad, but it just kind of causes you to have to work a little harder than, what you would have to before. So I think the biggest thing that I recognize within first impressions, and I think this goes for all leaders, but especially women in combat arms, is your physical fitness. Because it's something that, I think it's a main talking point when we talk about integration with women, that the physiological differences between men and women, and that's the biggest factor into why women can't or shouldn't, for the naysayers, shouldn't be in combat arms. So I know that one of the biggest things that helped me was coming in really fit. And so coming into my platoon very fit, and I don't just mean like, oh, she's fit for a girl, because people say that, which I think is ridiculous. But some of the fittest people I know are women. But it's something where you hold yourself to the male standard within the Army, because historically APFT, now ACFT, the gendered scales, the women's numbers are lower, and so I've had this mentality since I was at West Point of just holding myself to the male standard physically, because I'm leading men, and I can't ask them to obtain standards that I can't also do myself. And so I think coming in with that perspective and coming in at that level of fitness was key. And I think another thing is, like, when you're a woman and you're going into a combat arms branch, I think you have a feeling, or at least I did, of needing to prove yourself in all aspects. And I think one of my mistakes in this was that I felt like I needed to overemphasize my aggressive side, like overemphasize my masculine side, because I think everybody has kind of a mixture of both. And I really felt like I needed to play into my masculine side more than my feminine side, because I felt like, you know, I didn't want to be sexualized, and I didn't want people to see me as weak, you know, even though I don't think femininity is weak. It's just an antiquated perception that people have. So I think, you know, another first impression mistake that I made was coming in super, I wouldn't say super aggressive, but just, it kind of caught people off guard. And maybe because I'm a woman, that I was aggressive, and that I was obstinate, and that I was strong-willed, and that I didn't take any crap from people. So those are the two biggest things that I noticed for first impression.
And so you spoke on a few key things. So I just want everyone to know, so when Lauren hits on physical fitness, I can vouch for this one. So Lauren, just for example, Lauren meets or excels the male standard on every single fitness test that I've seen her take, whether that's the APFT or the ACFT. So what she's saying is really valid. Like, it is pretty important not to, you know, you have to be on that level with the rest of the guys, especially if you're leading guys. It absolutely makes sense. And with the ACFT standard switching, how has that been for combat arms? Was that maybe a step back, or do you think, what were you thinking?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've got some pretty strong thoughts on this, but what I really enjoyed about the ACFT, because obviously it wasn't for record, but, you know, we were testing it all over the place, and Combat Arms was using it pretty heavily as just to check and see how fit people are. And my unit did it a lot. We did it almost like once a month, because my company commander was super into just preparing to, you know, be ready when it did start to count for record. And I loved the fact that I could be on a scale that made sense for both sides, meaning like I was scored against my peers on the exact same scale. And it's good because it shows where you are in relation to them, like exactly.
Right.
There's no math that you have to change the scale for. There's no, you know, she's 135 pounds and a woman, and she did this, so that makes her impressive. Like, it was just what it was. And so I'm hitting, you know, a 520 on my ACFT, and at the time, that was top 10 in my unit, which is good. I mean, it's definitely not exactly where I wanted to be. I wanted to be higher. The ball toss was killing me. You know, some of these guys are launching the ball, and that was the biggest disparity I saw, was the ball toss, not necessarily leg tucks. But I know there's some issues with the leg tucks in general, but I never saw an issue with that myself. But the ball toss I did. So anyways, it was important to be like, I have a 520. My company commander got the same score as me, and my soldiers got this score or whatever, and then we're competing. Like, it's constant, healthy competition there with that kind of stuff. You know, it depends on the culture of your unit, but that being able to do that is healthy competition. And I think that putting it on a gendered scale, to me, in my opinion, is a step back. And the women that are going to be affected by this the most are the ones in combat arms units, because that's where, you know, those women are going to get the most flack about this, because those women also are the ones that wanted a gender neutral test. So it's just ironic that they're going to get the worst, you know, response to it, when in reality it's probably those women, myself included, that wanted a gender neutral test for the reasons that I stated. So I think it's a step back. I think a better solution would be to have scales based on your branch instead. Because if you're an armor officer, you, regardless of gender, need to be able to load a 60-pound round in less than 7 seconds, which is the standard.
Right.
And if you can't do that, then you shouldn't be in that profession. But it doesn't matter if you're me, 5'5", 135 or 140, or you're like one of my male peers who was like, 6 foot and 190, 200, or whatever it is, right? Like, we both should have been able to load around like that, because we're asking our soldiers to do it.
Right.
It shouldn't matter how big you are. I had a girl in my platoon who was 4'11", she weighed, I want to say 100 pounds, 105, 110. And she could still load around. Was it harder for her? Yes, but she was strong. So it's a step back because I thought we were going, especially because they advertised it as a gender neutral test at first and then went back on it. So it's a point of frustration for me, and I'll stop there before I get on a tangent. But yeah, I'm frustrated with it.
Absolutely understandable. Be interesting to see how it is implemented in the Army in the future, especially amongst the different branches. So on top of, coming in as a new platoon leader and trying to fit in with your unit, also with, trying to perform well, and then also having to try not to play into kind of that stereotype of being a, quote unquote female. So when you were in the unit for maybe a long period of time, did you find that you no longer had to worry about your perception, or was it something that you still kind of noticed at the back of your mind, or whether it was, if you were getting angry about something, or if you could tell that you were starting to show emotion, was that something that you still took into consideration?
Yeah, I was aware of it every second of every day. So I might be on the extreme side of this, but I think it was because of the mentality I went into. I knew that I was going to be one of the first female leaders that they'd ever experienced. And so the moment I got to my unit, and before I was prepping for this too, like I wanted to set an example, because my goal was to show people that women could come into combat arms units and be as successful, if not better, than male counterparts. And I'm not the type to be like, women are better, all men are trash, stuff like that. While I do agree that there are a lot of systemic issues and a lot of issues that we need to address as a society, I think that, I had people on my side that helped me out and would have helped me out if I came forward with anything. But my goal was to show up and show that, and to show that women can do this, and that they can be leaders, and they can be good leaders to men, to male-dominated environments. And I had some female soldiers come in after, because there was this rule for integration that you had to have one or two female leaders in your unit before you could have any soldiers come in. And so it was a little bit until we got some female soldiers. But, a woman's reputation is a fragile thing. And I think that goes for anywhere, not just the Army, but anywhere. But it's even more so when you're one of the only ones, because you're kind of in a fishbowl, and people know who you are. And you see this at West Point too. I know you felt this, where there's so few women, where it's about 20%, right? And there's so few women, and everyone knows who they are, right? Because there's so few of them. And so I just always felt like I was being evaluated, and maybe I was overly paranoid about my professional reputation, but I was constantly aware of how I interacted with any men, because I didn't want rumors to be spread about me, because that's happened to me in the past. Like at West Point, at Bolick, it happens every single time I go somewhere, and I feel like a lot of women can relate to that. Like there's always going to be rumors, especially if you're a single female. Like if you're a single female in a unit, like there's always going to be rumors. So I was paranoid about it because it's happened to me before, and I just was not expecting anything different. And so there was stuff like I even watched how much I laughed around men, especially single men in my unit, because I didn't want people to think that I was sleeping around. And even with all of that, it's, rumors still occurred. And I was ready for it, but it still kind of crushed me, because I was being so careful. Like nothing was going on. And, even if there was, I'm not sure why it matters, but, after a while they died down, and it's kind of funny because, I cut my hair 2 years ago, really short, shaved on the sides and stuff, and like donated it. And when that happened, the rumors started dying down, and I think it's just interesting, because I think it was because people thought that I was gay because I cut my hair, and I didn't cut my hair for that reason, but it ended up being like a perk, because then I started being seen as Lieutenant McGovern instead of just the female LT. And, the interactions that I would have with my fellow lieutenants, and one of them can vouch for this. Like, I'd go hang out and have lunch with them and just talk about PL stuff, like, oh, how was it for him? What was I facing? Because we came in time, and guys in his unit, when I would leave, would ask and be like, yo, what's going on with you and LT McGovern? He responded to this in the best way that I've, like, ever had a friend do that. He was like, why are you even asking me that question? That's an inappropriate question. You should not be asking me that. He didn't even entertain it,
right.
Not in any way. And I just thought that was super powerful to have a friend like that in there. And, the other part of it is watching how you're perceived as far as emotions. And I think women get that a lot too. Like, oh, women are emotional, they're ran by their emotions. And in reality, like, I feel like both genders are. They manifest in different ways. So I would get the critique a lot of, you need to stop being so emotional. And you know me, Nikaya, like, I don't cry. I'm not emotional in what people see as the stereotypical way women are. I get angry, and I've had anger management issues for a long time and been working through those, and have gotten a lot better. But it doesn't matter because it's seen as emotional. But it's interesting because I think that that's the way men portray their, being overly emotional is anger. And I would watch, like, some of my male LT counterparts, like, blow their gaskets on a regular basis. And they weren't getting the same critique. It was kind of just, like, expected. I don't know. And nobody really blinked an eye at it, other than the soldiers maybe respecting them a little less because they lost their cool. But so after a while, that emotional regulation critique wore on me, and I just kind of stopped listening to it because I couldn't be sure if it was because it was an actual problem or if it was because it was perception based. People weren't used to having a female leader, and so anything I did was seen as emotional. So I just couldn't tell. I'm sure there's some truth to both sides. So I kind of just stopped listening to it and quit being so paranoid about it, and just was myself and reacted the way that I thought was appropriate. And it maybe people still thought I was overly emotional, but I just didn't pay attention to it as much, and it served me better in the long run.
Lauren, I would have to agree on the point that you just made about, if a guy blows up because he's upset, it's okay. The soldiers might lose a little bit of respect for him, but that's how guys, quote unquote, are supposed to, release and show emotion, especially in a combat arm. However, if a female were to do the same thing, they might be labeled as moody, which is so interesting because I have definitely seen the same thing. So I can definitely vouch for you on that one. I've definitely noticed that as well.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I just had another interesting point. It's like, I have leaders who, would mention menstrual cycles about it, right? And one, that's inappropriate. Don't talk to me about my mood swings and my period, because I guarantee you know nothing about it, right? So I would have leaders do that where they're like, oh, you must be on your period or whatever. I can tell you right now, nobody in my unit ever knew when I was on it and when I was not. I can tell you that right now. I made that like a key thing because I didn't want anybody to hold that against me, just because I have this going on. And so even in the field, like, no one ever knew. And I had to help the female soldiers that were in my unit that, male leadership was kind of underprepared for, the stuff that female hygiene stuff that goes on in the field. And it was never really that big of an issue. I just said, on the next supply run, go pick up some tampons and bring them back. And it was settled there. They weren't complaining. They just needed some additional materials, right? But it was such a big deal. Not all the male leadership, but some of the male leadership was like, oh my God, I can't believe we have to do this. I can't believe they didn't prepare all this and all that. And I was like, okay, you guys are making it a bigger deal than it is, because we've had to go get stuff for male soldiers too. Not necessarily hygiene, but stuff that they didn't prepare for, right? It's just, it's a thing, right? And so it's just interesting what gets attributed to it. And, that's the type of stuff that I set hard boundaries on. Like, if anybody ever said anything about somebody being on their menstrual cycle, it was an immediate, we're going to talk about this right now, and you can't be saying that about your peers, your fellow soldiers, your
Right.
E5s or 4s. Like, that's just damaging, and you look stupid when you say stuff like that. So I made sure they knew. But yeah, anyways, that's what I wanted to add.
I feel like comments like that definitely make it harder to, level the battlefield from males to females, especially when you hear people saying stuff like that, because it's just like, seriously, like, is this really what's coming up? Not my performance, but,
Right.
whether or not I am on my period this month, or, why should it even matter? You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So, Lauren, have you ever been put in a situation that maybe you would not have if you weren't a female?
Yeah, that's a good one, and I think a common one, and something a lot of women again can relate to is getting hit on. And I already mentioned that I cut my hair, and then people thought that I was gay, and then didn't do it as much. But I was in my unit, I want to say at least 5 or 6 months with long hair. I've had long hair my whole life until 2 years ago, so it was nothing to me. But I had long hair, and I did get hit on in that time and got inappropriate messages and advances from the rank of specialist up to captain while I was there. Leaders in my unit, and soldiers in my unit that were married and single. And it's not like I think it happens to all women, regardless of what you look like or who you are and what rank you are. It happens to all of them, because I've gotten stories from everyone. I've talked to other women in combat arms, being like, "Are you experiencing the same thing?" And they've experienced that, and much worse, much worse. And so it's something I take very seriously, and it's something that was very hard for me. And luckily, I had you to help me, kind of get through it. But it's a moral gray area, like when you get hit on and stuff like that, where it's not, it's not sexual assault, and by definition, it is sexual harassment, and it's really hard to come forward with that stuff, because while I felt like I had a lot of people that were always on my side, and I said before, if I ever brought anything forward, I know they would have had my back, and that my leadership would have believed me. I do believe that, but it's, as I've mentioned, a woman's reputation is fragile. So if any of it ever came out, even though I rejected all advances, I still would have been looked at differently. And even at this point, I had a good reputation, and I think I had gained some respect in my unit. Saying something about that, or if you report a sexual harassment or assault issue, it makes you, and I say this in quotations, that girl. The girl who shot someone in their unit. And that's a label that you get, even if it's correct. And I saw that in my unit. I saw women who came forward with really uncomfortable things, and it was handled immediately. My unit did a really good job with that, but, they were still looked at differently, and it was so sad to see, and heartbreaking, and it was a really hard time for me, and I'm still not sure if I handled it as best as I could have, but hindsight's 20/20, and what I want to say is that, is to any women listening, or men that are uncomfortable as well, that if something like that happens to you, make your boundaries known and be strong in them and stand up for yourself. Because I think there's this thing where you kind of, maybe you're afraid to reject somebody because you might be afraid of their reaction, or you might be afraid of the consequences that come out of it, like if it comes out. But I would say do it, because if somebody makes you uncomfortable, then you have the right to come forward and let others know, and you have the right to stand up for yourself. And, I just want to say, like, anyone listening, if they need someone to talk to, then, Nakai and I are both here to listen. But it's just, it's a whole thing of, like, my goal coming in. I didn't want my example to be tarnished by somebody else's actions, somebody else who decided to say inappropriate things to me. I didn't want their actions to tarnish everything that I'd worked for, because I was in that unit for 2 years, and
Right.
I worked really hard to make a reputation for myself and to show what women could do in combat arms. And I just, I'm so emotional about it, but I'm not saying I did it perfectly, and I definitely could have handled some things differently. I think so, but I tried the best that I could and did the best that I could in that situation. And I hope that I left my unit with the mark that women could kick ass in combat arms, because I didn't want that to mar all the work that I've done. And I wanted that unit to have like an example that, you know, could continue, you know, and that the soldiers that leave that unit go to other units and they know that women could do well, and they take that perception with them. And so, you know, that's a goal that all these trailblazers have. And, you know, I wasn't the initial class that goes in, and those women had it even harder than I did. So I'm just hoping that, you know, that unit has a different perception now, and the women that come in after me, you know, don't have to deal with as much as I did. So, yeah.
That is so beautiful, Lauren. Thank you so much for showing that to us, and thank you for your willingness and your candor and honesty to, you know, share your experiences to myself and the audience. I know that your experiences that you've shown, that you've gone through so far, have definitely helped and, you know, probably hit home to many of those listening. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
So that is all the time we have for today. Please join us next month for another eye-opening conversation from the female leader point of view, from her perspective.